My boyfriend sent me a Venmo request for $43 after I paid his rent for 6 months. I'd been dating Kevin for about a year, and things started out pretty normal. We both had decent jobs, split dates 50-50, took turns buying groceries when we stayed at each other's places. He worked at a marketing firm, and I was a project manager at a tech company. Made about the same money. Everything was balanced and fair. Then Kevin's company did layoffs and he lost his job. I felt terrible for him and immediately offered to help out while he got back on his feet. That first month, I covered his part of dinners and told him not to worry about paying me back. He was stressed about interviews and I wanted to be supportive. Month 2 came around and his landlord was threatening eviction. Kevin called me crying, saying he'd be homeless. I paid his $2,200 rent without hesitation. Told him to focus on the job search. He seemed grateful, brought me flowers from the grocery store, made me dinner at his place with groceries I'd bought. Month 3, same thing. He had some interviews but nothing solid yet. I paid his rent again plus his car payment because he said he needed it to get to interviews. He'd cook for me sometimes and tell me how lucky he was to have me. I believed him. Month 4, he got a job offer but said it didn't start for another month. Asked if I could cover him one more time. I did. Plus his phone bill, car insurance, and gave him money for interview clothes. He promised he'd pay me back once he started working. Month 5, he'd started the new job but said the first paycheck wouldn't come for 3 weeks. I paid everything again. He was less grateful this time, just expected it. Stopped cooking for me. Said he was too tired from the new job. Month 6 was when things got interesting. He got his first full paycheck. I saw the deposit notification on his phone when he was showing me something else. $4,800. More than he made at his old job. I figured he'd immediately offer to start paying me back or at least cover his own rent now. Nope. He asked me to cover 1 more month so he could build up his savings. Said it would be irresponsible not to have an emergency fund. I was annoyed but paid it, thinking this was definitely the last time. 2 weeks later, we went to dinner to celebrate his cousin's birthday. Nice steakhouse, about 12 people. When the check came, everyone was splitting it. Kevin's portion was $87. He looked at me and said loud enough for everyone to hear that I'd get this one since he got the last one. He hadn't paid for anything in 6 months. I paid to avoid embarrassment. The next morning, Kevin texted me a Venmo request for $43.50. Said I'd ordered the more expensive wine so I should pay him back for my half of dinner. The dinner I'd entirely paid for. After I'd paid his rent for 6 months. I stared at that Venmo request for 20 minutes. Then I noticed something funny. Kevin had changed his Venmo to public recently. I could see all his transactions, and he'd been sending money to someone named Brittany with flirty emojis for weeks. Drinks, dinners, even a hotel room. While I was paying his rent, he was dating someone else. But I also noticed something else. His car wasn't actually in his name. It was still under financing from the dealership, and the account holder was his ex-girlfriend from 2 years ago. She'd co-signed and he'd just kept paying, except I'd been the one paying recently. I called his ex Rachel, told her Kevin and I had broken up and I wanted to make sure she knew I wouldn't be making any more car payments. She was confused because Kevin had told her he paid off the car months ago. I explained the situation. She was furious. Turns out she'd been getting notices about late payments affecting her credit before I started paying. She'd been asking Kevin about it and he kept saying it was handled. She thanked me and said she'd take care of it. Then I got petty. I accepted his Venmo request, but for 1 cent. In the notes, I wrote, "Here's your half of dinner. We're now even for the $13,800 I spent on your rent and bills." Made sure it was public. All his friends could see it. His cousin who was at the dinner commented, "What?" immediately. Then I texted Kevin saying I needed to talk. He came over all angry about the Venmo thing. I told him we were done and I wanted him to start paying me back. He laughed and said gifts didn't need to be repaid. That's when Rachel's revenge kicked in. Rachel's first text came through while Kevin was still standing in my apartment trying to explain why the money was a gift. My phone buzzed and I glanced down to see her message saying she'd just filed a stolen vehicle report with the police and contacted the dealership about repossession. I felt this rush of satisfaction knowing Kevin had no idea what was coming. He kept talking about how relationships meant supporting each other, and I wasn't listening anymore because Rachel sent another update saying the dealership confirmed they could tow the car within 2 hours since the account was 3 months behind before I started paying. Kevin finally left after I told him we had nothing else to discuss, and I sat on my couch refreshing my phone every few minutes waiting for Rachel's next message. She sent a photo of the police report number and said she'd explained everything about Kevin lying, that the car was paid off while her credit score dropped 40 points from his missed payments. The satisfaction felt almost wrong, but also completely justified after watching him send Brittany money for hotels while I covered his rent. My phone started ringing around 6 that evening and Kevin's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately, and I declined it. By the time Ashlyn arrived with 2 bottles of wine, he'd called me 17 times and left 8 voicemails. We sat on my couch and I played them on speaker while she poured us both glasses. The first message had Kevin yelling about how his car got towed and did I have something to do with it. The second one claimed I was ruining his life and he'd lose his new job without transportation. The third through 8th got increasingly desperate with him saying he couldn't afford an Uber to work, and this was all my fault for telling Rachel lies about him. Ashlyn paused after the last voicemail finished and pointed out that Kevin never once said he was sorry or admitted he did anything wrong. He just kept blaming me for consequences he'd earned himself. She asked if I felt bad, and I told her honestly that I didn't, which surprised me because normally I felt guilty about everything. We finished the first bottle of wine while my phone kept buzzing with more calls I didn't answer. I woke up the next morning to find Kevin had made a public Venmo post calling me a vindictive ex who couldn't handle the breakup and claiming I was harassing him with false accusations about money he never owed me. He'd written this whole paragraph about how he was the real victim, and I was trying to destroy his reputation because he'd moved on. I stared at my phone, feeling anger build in my chest until I saw that Peyton had already commented. She'd posted screenshots of Kevin's Venmo transactions to Brittany with the flirty emojis and hotel payment, asking him to explain those since they were dated during our relationship. Other people started commenting within minutes, asking Kevin what was going on and why he was sending another girl money for romantic stuff while he had a girlfriend. His cousin from the dinner added that she'd been there when he made me pay, and it seemed weird now knowing everything else. I watched Kevin's narrative completely fall apart in the comment section as more people asked questions he couldn't answer without admitting what he'd done. He deleted the post an hour later, but people had already screenshot everything. I spent Saturday morning pulling up bank statements on my laptop while Ashlyn came over with coffee and her own laptop. We sat at my kitchen table and started documenting every single dollar I'd spent on Kevin over 6 months. She created a spreadsheet with columns for date, amount, purpose, and evidence, while I went through my banking app finding each transaction. $2,200 for rent in March, another $2,200 in April, $2,200 in May, plus his $300 car payment. I found the Venmo transfers I'd sent him for his phone bill and insurance, the cash I'd given him for interview clothes, the groceries I'd bought for dinners at his place. Ashlyn added each one to the spreadsheet with the date and took screenshots of my bank statements showing the transactions. By Saturday afternoon, we had everything organized and the total came to $13,800, exactly like I'd written in my Venmo response. Seeing it all laid out in neat rows made the manipulation even clearer, because I could track how the amounts increased over time, and how Kevin's gratitude decreased as the payments continued. The first month showed small amounts and lots of thank you texts I'd screenshot. The last month showed major payments and text messages from him asking when I'd send the money like it was expected. Monday morning at work, I couldn't focus on anything because I kept checking my phone to see what Kevin's friends were posting on social media. They'd started leaving vague comments about how there's 2 sides to every story, and people shouldn't believe everything they read online. Someone posted about crazy exes who can't let go, and several people liked it even though they had to know it was about me. My manager noticed I was staring at my computer without actually working, and called me into her office around 10. I thought I was in trouble, but she closed the door and asked if everything was okay because I seemed distracted. I ended up telling her the basic situation about paying Kevin's rent for 6 months and him sending me a Venmo request, then finding out he was dating someone else the whole time. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me she'd gone through something similar years ago with a boyfriend who borrowed money and never paid it back. She said I should document everything for potential legal action because the amount was significant enough to pursue in small claims court. I hadn't even thought about actually suing Kevin, but hearing my manager suggest it made the idea feel less crazy. Kevin showed up at my apartment Tuesday evening around 7 without texting first. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there in his work clothes looking tired. He knocked again and said he wanted to talk like adults about the situation. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. He tried to push past me anyway, talking about how we needed to work this out reasonably, and I was overreacting to everything. I let him in only because my neighbors were in the hallway, and I didn't want an audience. Kevin sat on my couch and launched into this whole speech about how the money was a gift, because we were in a relationship, and that's what partners do for each other when someone's struggling. He completely ignored that he was dating Brittany while I paid his bills, and when I brought that up, he claimed they were just friends, and I was reading too much into some Venmo transactions. I pulled out my phone and started recording the conversation without telling him. He kept insisting that I'd given him the money freely without any agreement to pay it back, so legally it was a gift. He said taking him to court would be embarrassing for both of us, and I should just accept that relationships sometimes don't work out. I told him to leave, and he acted offended that I wasn't being reasonable about the whole thing. By Friday afternoon, I got a message request on Instagram from someone named Brittany. I opened it and found this long paragraph explaining that she'd seen the Venmo drama and Kevin's deleted post, and needed to tell me she had no idea he had a girlfriend. She wrote that Kevin told her he was single and between jobs when they met, and she'd been buying him dinners and paying for activities because she thought she was helping her boyfriend during a hard time. She said she felt sick realizing he'd lied to both of us, and asked if we could meet for coffee to compare what he'd told each of us. I showed the message to Ashlyn, and she immediately said I should meet with Brittany because knowing his full pattern of lies would help if I decided to pursue legal action. I messaged Brittany back and we agreed to meet Saturday morning at a coffee shop near my apartment. Meeting Brittany felt strange because I'd spent weeks being angry at her for being the other woman, but sitting across from her I realized she was just another person Kevin had used. She brought her phone with screenshots of their text conversations and Venmo history. We compared timelines and discovered Kevin was running the same basic con on both of us with slightly different details. She paid for a weekend trip to the coast in May, thinking it was a romantic getaway for just the two of them. I paid his rent that same month thinking I was supporting my struggling boyfriend who couldn't afford his bills. She bought him dinners 3 times a week, believing she was helping him save money during unemployment. I was sending him grocery money and paying his car insurance for the same reason. Kevin had told her his car was in the shop, which was why she drove everywhere, when really his car was about to get repossessed for missed payments. We sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours going through everything, and the anger shifted from each other to him. There was this weird feeling of being on the same team, even though we'd technically been competing for the same guy without knowing it. Ashlyn suggested I talk to a lawyer about recovering the money, so I looked up small claims attorneys and found Benjamin Watts, who had good reviews for cases under $15,000. I met with him on a Wednesday afternoon at his office and brought my laptop with the spreadsheet and all my documentation. He spent 40 minutes reviewing everything while I sat across from his desk feeling nervous about how much this was going to cost. Benjamin finally looked up and explained that Kevin calling everything a gift complicated the case because relationship expenses can be tricky legally. But he said the sheer amount of money plus my evidence of Kevin's text messages promising to pay me back once he started working gave me a reasonable case for unjust enrichment. He could argue that Kevin accepted the money under false pretenses by lying about his employment status and his relationship with Brittany. Benjamin quoted me $800 for representation through the small claims process. I thought about how ironic it was to spend more money trying to get money back, but I was tired of Kevin facing no real consequences for what he'd done. I wrote Benjamin a check for the retainer. 2 weeks after the breakup, Kevin's mother called me on a Sunday afternoon. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but curiosity won. Nyla introduced herself and asked if we could work this situation out without involving lawyers and courts. She said Kevin was struggling financially now without my help, and implied I was being cruel by not just moving on with my life. I felt my jaw clench because of course Kevin had run to his mother and painted himself as the victim. I told Nyla that Kevin earned $4,800 last month at his new job, and chose to send me a Venmo request for $43 instead of paying his own rent. She went quiet for a few seconds before saying, I clearly didn't understand how hard things were for him right now with the car situation and everyone talking about him online. I asked if she understood that her son stole almost $14,000 from me while dating someone else, and she said I was being dramatic about normal relationship expenses. I told her my lawyer would be in touch and ended the call. I walked into Benjamin's office 3 days later with my documentation organized in a folder. He reviewed the paperwork one more time and nodded. The small claims court filing fee was $75, which seemed like nothing compared to what Kevin owed me. Benjamin filled out the forms with my information and the amount I was seeking, then explained the process server would deliver the papers to Kevin at his workplace within 48 hours. I signed everything and wrote another check. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. It was all caps and full of spelling errors because he was typing so fast. He called me petty and vindictive and said I was trying to ruin his career by having him served at work. I screenshotted the text and sent it to Benjamin, who replied that Kevin's reaction showed exactly the kind of person we were dealing with. Kevin sent 3 more texts threatening to countersue me for emotional distress and claiming his lawyer said I had no case. Benjamin called me that evening and said Kevin didn't have a lawyer, and the emotional distress claim was just intimidation tactics to scare me into dropping the case. 3 weeks after the breakup, I met Ashlyn for lunch at the place near our office. She'd been checking in on me daily, and I appreciated having someone who understood the whole situation. We were halfway through our sandwiches when she asked if I'd seen what people were posting online. I hadn't been on social media much because I didn't want to see Kevin's version of events. Ashlyn pulled up her phone and showed me comments from people we both knew. A few mutual friends had posted vague things about keeping relationship problems private, and how airing dirty laundry online was immature. One girl from Kevin's friend group wrote a whole paragraph about how breakups are hard on everyone, and people should have grace for each other during difficult times. I felt my stomach drop because these were people I thought would understand once they knew the facts. Ashlyn pointed out that the people defending Kevin were mostly his friends who didn't know about Brittany or the car situation or the months of lies. But it still hurt to see people I'd considered friends choosing to stay neutral or worse, implying I was wrong for exposing what he did. By the end of the week, 2 people had unfriended me completely. I knew I should have expected it because people always prioritize their own comfort over supporting what's right, but I'd thought the evidence spoke for itself. Kevin started posting on social media about a week later. He didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious who he meant. He wrote about how hard it was to recover from a relationship where someone controlled him with money and made him completely dependent. He talked about financial abuse and how people don't recognize it when men are the victims. I actually laughed out loud when I first read it because the reality was so completely opposite. But then I saw people commenting with support and sympathy. His cousin Peyton, who'd witnessed the whole Venmo situation, didn't say anything to correct him. Some of his coworkers left encouraging comments about him being strong. I realized Kevin was better at manipulation than I'd given him credit for. He'd taken the actual situation and flipped it completely around to make himself the victim. Ashlyn sent me screenshots of conversations where people were discussing whether I'd really been financially abusive. A few people pointed out that I'd paid his rent willingly and he never forced me, but Kevin's version was gaining traction because he told it first and told it loudly. My phone buzzed on a Tuesday morning with a text from Brittany. She said Kevin had contacted her the night before trying to reconcile. He told her that he and I were basically broken up during their relationship, and he'd made a mistake by not being honest with her. He claimed he really cared about her and wanted another chance. Brittany sent me screenshots of the whole conversation. She'd responded by sending him screenshots from our coffee meeting where we'd compared timelines and figured out his con. Kevin's response was a string of messages calling her horrible names and accusing her of conspiring against him with his crazy ex. The messages got progressively nastier until Brittany stopped responding. She told me she was considering filing a police report for harassment because some of his texts felt threatening. I forwarded everything to Benjamin, who said it showed Kevin's character and could be useful if we needed it. Brittany and I texted back and forth for an hour. We'd formed this weird alliance based on being manipulated by the same person. The mediation notice arrived exactly 1 month after I filed the paperwork. It was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at the courthouse. Benjamin explained that mediation was required before small claims cases could go to trial. A neutral third party would try to help us reach an agreement without involving the judge. He said most cases settled in mediation because people realized going to court was more hassle than just working something out. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing work clothes and carrying my folder of evidence. Benjamin met me in the hallway and we walked into the small conference room together. Kevin showed up 10 minutes late with his mother. No lawyer. Nyla sat down next to him and immediately started talking about how this whole situation was unnecessary. The mediator was a woman in her 50s who introduced herself and explained the process. She suggested we start by each stating our position. I went first and laid out the facts with dates and amounts. Kevin interrupted twice, but the mediator asked him to wait his turn. When I finished, the mediator asked Kevin for his side. He said everything I'd given him was a gift because we were in a relationship, and that's what people do when they love each other. Nyla jumped in and started talking about Kevin's difficult childhood and how he'd always struggled with money. The mediator gently redirected her and asked Kevin if he'd be willing to repay any amount. Kevin said no. He didn't owe me anything. The mediator suggested a compromise of $5,000 as partial repayment. I was willing to consider it just to be done with everything, but Kevin refused. He said accepting any repayment would be admitting he did something wrong and he didn't do anything wrong. The mediation lasted 90 minutes and went nowhere. Kevin tried the same manipulation tactics that used to work on me. He got tears in his eyes talking about how much he'd loved me. He said he thought we were building a life together, and he never imagined I'd turn on him like this. He looked directly at me while he talked, trying to make me feel guilty, but I could see exactly what he was doing now. The tears looked fake. The hurt in his voice sounded rehearsed. I felt annoyed that he thought I was still easy enough to manipulate with the same old tricks. The mediator asked him specific questions about the timeline, and his story kept changing. First, he said he'd told me his new job didn't start for a month. Then he said he'd told me it started right away, but the first check was delayed. He claimed he'd offered to pay me back multiple times, but I'd refused, which was completely false. The mediator noticed the inconsistencies. She wrote notes every time his story shifted. After the third major contradiction, she suggested we move forward with a court hearing since we clearly weren't going to reach an agreement. Kevin and Nyla left angry. I heard Nyla telling him in the hallway that I was being unreasonable, and he should countersue me for everything. Benjamin and I stayed in the conference room after they left. He closed his folder and told me that Kevin's refusal to negotiate actually helped my case. It showed bad faith and unwillingness to resolve the situation reasonably. We spent the next 2 hours in his office going through everything again. Benjamin organized the evidence into a clear timeline with bank statements showing every payment I'd made. He had copies of Kevin's text messages promising to pay me back once his job started. We even had written testimony from Brittany about Kevin's pattern of financial manipulation with her. She'd agreed to provide a statement describing how he'd gotten money from her, using similar tactics during the same time period I was supporting him. Benjamin explained that showing a pattern would strengthen the case significantly. The preparation process felt good. I was taking action instead of just being angry. Every document we organized felt like taking back a piece of control that Kevin had stolen. Rachel texted me 6 weeks after the breakup. The dealership had sold Kevin's car at auction, and she was still on the hook for the remaining balance. $3,400 that she didn't have because she'd been paying her own bills and dealing with the credit damage from Kevin's missed payments. She said she was pursuing Kevin separately for that amount through her own small claims case. We joked about starting a support group for Kevin's financial victims with her and Brittany as founding members. It was funny but also depressing when I really thought about it. Kevin had hurt at least 3 women financially, probably more that we didn't know about. Rachel said she'd talked to his ex before her who mentioned Kevin had borrowed money during their relationship too. There was a pattern going back years. He found women who cared about him, convinced them to support him financially, then moved on when they stopped being useful. I wondered how many other women were out there who'd lost money to Kevin's manipulation and never did anything about it because they felt embarrassed or thought it was their fault. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning 2 months after I filed. I barely slept the night before. Benjamin had prepared me for what to expect, but I was still nervous. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early and sat on a bench outside the courtroom going through my folder one more time. Kevin showed up right before the hearing started wearing a suit that looked expensive. He'd clearly spent time on his appearance to look professional and put together. We were called into the small courtroom and the judge asked us to state our cases. Kevin went first this time. He told the judge he was the victim of a bitter ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept that their relationship was over. He said I was using the court system to harass him, and everything I'd given him was a gift. The judge listened without expression, then asked Kevin to explain the Venmo transactions to Brittany during the time we were dating. Kevin stumbled. He said Brittany was just a friend and the transactions were for shared expenses. The judge asked what kind of shared expenses included hotel rooms and romantic dinner emojis. Kevin's face went red and he started talking about how his personal life wasn't relevant to this case. The judge disagreed and said it was very relevant to whether he'd accepted money under false pretenses. Kevin's whole victim narrative fell apart in about 5 minutes. The judge reviewed my bank statements and the text messages where Kevin promised repayment. She asked me several questions about the nature of our relationship and whether I'd expected repayment at the time. I explained that I'd offered to help temporarily while Kevin got back on his feet, and he'd specifically promised to pay me back once he started working. The judge looked at Kevin and asked why he'd sent me a Venmo request for $43 if everything was a gift that didn't need repayment. Kevin didn't have a good answer. He said something about me ordering expensive wine, but it sounded weak even to him. The judge took 10 minutes to review everything again, then delivered her decision. She awarded me $9,200 of the $13,800 I'd requested. She explained that some expenses could reasonably be considered relationship costs that both parties contribute to. But the rent payments combined with Kevin's lies about his employment status and his relationship with Brittany constituted unjust enrichment. Kevin had accepted money by deceiving me about his circumstances and intentions. The judge ordered him to pay $400 monthly until the debt was cleared. It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it felt like validation. I wasn't crazy. Kevin had actually wronged me, and now there was a legal judgment saying so. I walked out of the courthouse that day feeling like I'd won something real, but Benjamin caught me in the parking lot before I got to my car. He looked tired, like he'd seen this exact situation play out 100 times before. He explained that getting a judgment was the easy part, and actually collecting the money would be a whole different battle. So Kevin was ordered to pay $400 a month until the $9,200 was cleared, but Benjamin warned me that plenty of people just ignore court orders and make you chase them for years. I nodded and told him I understood, but honestly I figured Kevin would at least try to avoid more legal trouble. I was wrong about that. The first payment was due 3 weeks after the judgment, and the date came and went with nothing showing up in my bank account. I waited 2 extra days thinking maybe Kevin was just late, but by day 5 I knew he was going to make this as difficult as possible. I called Benjamin and he explained the wage garnishment process, which meant going back to court to file more paperwork and paying another $150 in fees just to force Kevin's employer to take the money directly from his paycheck. The whole thing felt exhausting, like I was punished twice for Kevin's actions. I paid the fees and filed the paperwork, and Benjamin submitted everything to the court. It took another 3 weeks for the garnishment order to go through, and during that time, Kevin sent me exactly one text message asking if we could work out a payment plan that didn't involve his employer. I didn't respond because I'd learned that any communication with Kevin just gave him an opening to manipulate the situation. The garnishment finally kicked in, and I started seeing deposits of $400 hitting my account every month like clockwork. Felt good knowing Kevin couldn't avoid it anymore, but I also felt weird about the whole thing. I'd spent so much time and energy chasing this money that sometimes I wondered if it was even worth it. Benjamin had been right when he said most people don't pursue these cases, and now I understood why. The emotional cost of fighting for what you're owed can feel almost as bad as just letting someone get away with stealing from you. 2 months after the court hearing, my manager Sarah pulled me into her office on a Thursday afternoon. I immediately got nervous because I'd been distracted at work during the whole Kevin situation, and I worried she was going to talk to me about my performance. Instead, she closed the door and told me she'd been watching how I handled everything over the past few months. She said she was impressed that I'd dealt with such a difficult personal situation while still showing up every day and doing my job well. I felt my shoulders relax because I hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying that tension. Sarah explained that the company was starting a major new project with one of our biggest clients, and they needed a lead project manager to run it. The role came with a significant raise and would put me in charge of a team of 6 people. She asked if I was interested, and I said yes immediately, even though part of me felt like the raise was almost $1,200 more per month, which felt like the universe balancing things out after Kevin had taken so much from me. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months, and I realized something weird had happened. Standing up to Kevin and fighting for myself in court had made me more confident in other parts of my life too. I'd stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault at work. I'd started speaking up more in meetings, and I'd set clearer boundaries with everyone around me. The Kevin situation had been awful, but it taught me that I was stronger than I thought I was. 4 months after the breakup, I stopped at a coffee shop near my apartment to grab something before a Saturday morning run. I was standing in line looking at my phone when I heard someone say my name. I looked up and Kevin was standing 3 feet away holding a cup of coffee. My first reaction was nothing, which surprised me more than anything else. No anger, no hurt, no anxiety, just this mild annoyance like when someone cuts you off in traffic and you forget about it 5 minutes later. Kevin smiled like we were old friends and asked how I'd been. I told him I was fine and turned back to the counter to order. He kept talking, saying something about how we should move past all this drama and maybe grab lunch sometime to clear the air. I ordered my coffee and then looked at him directly. I told him to make his payments on time and walked out without waiting for a response. My hands were steady and my heart wasn't racing, and I felt completely normal. I got in my car and drove home, and the whole interaction felt like it had happened to someone else. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. She said Kevin had showed up at her gym that morning trying to start a conversation about getting coffee and catching up. She'd told him to leave her alone and walked away, and now she was texting to warn me in case he tried the same thing with me. I replied that he already had, and I'd handled it the same way. We both agreed that Kevin was probably running out of women who would put up with his behavior and was trying to circle back to old targets. The thought made me laugh, which felt good. 6 months ago, I would have been devastated by Kevin trying to contact me, but now it just seemed pathetic and desperate. I'd moved on completely, and he was still stuck trying to manipulate people into feeling sorry for him. 6 months after everything started with that Venmo request, I was sitting in my apartment on a Sunday morning doing absolutely nothing and feeling perfectly content about it. The wage garnishment had been running for 4 months, and I'd collected $2,400 of the $9,200 Kevin owed me. Benjamin had explained that at this rate it would take about another 1.5 years to get the full amount, but I was okay with that because the money showed up automatically every month and I didn't have to think about it. The promotion at work had gone through, and I was leading the big project Sarah had mentioned, and my team was actually doing really well. I'd gotten my first paycheck with the raise and immediately set up automatic transfers to rebuild my savings account that had been drained by Kevin's rent payments. I was also dating someone new named Tyrone who I'd met through a friend at work. We'd been seeing each other for about 6 weeks and things were going well, mostly because Tyrone insisted on splitting everything exactly 50-50. The first time we went to dinner, he'd pulled out his phone to calculate his exact portion of the bill, including tax and tip, and I'd felt this wave of relief wash over me. He wasn't taking advantage. He wasn't expecting me to cover him. He just wanted things to be fair. We'd had a conversation early on about my situation with Kevin, and Tyrone had been clear that he believed in both people contributing equally to a relationship. It felt almost too good to be true, but I was trying to stay open to the possibility that not everyone was like Kevin. I'd learned some important things over the past 6 months, and the biggest one was that being generous without boundaries isn't actually love. Real partnership means both people show up and both people contribute, and when that balance gets off, it stops being a relationship and starts being something else entirely. Sometimes the messiest endings teach you the most important lessons about protecting yourself while still staying open to real connection with someone who actually deserves your trust.